I never expected to raise a child again at 64, but life rarely asks for permission. When my grandson, Eli, was diagnosed with autism at age 4, my daughter, Kelsey, simply folded. She was overwhelmed, unprepared, and angry at a world that hadn't gone the way she imagined. One morning, she left a note on my kitchen table, 4 sentences scribbled in the margin of a grocery receipt. She needed space. She needed freedom. She said she'd send money. She never did. So it was just me and Eli. Raising him was not always easy. He didn't speak until he was 7. He rocked when he was anxious, hummed when he was happy, and flapped his hands when words failed him. But he was brilliant, brilliant in the way that doesn't look like brilliance at first. He could take apart a remote control in 30 seconds. He would line up the pieces, turning each one over, memorizing their shapes. By 9, he rebuilt an old broken laptop I had planned to throw out. I gave him stability. He gave me purpose. At 13, he taught himself Python from online videos. At 15, he built a small program that helped kids who struggled with writing by breaking assignments into visual blocks. His teachers began sending parents to me, asking if Eli could make versions for their kids. By 17, he built something bigger, an app called Clarity Path, designed to help neurodivergent students organize tasks using patterns rather than words. It went viral in a niche community first, then in a bigger one. Investors called. A tech blog ran an article with a headline I still have framed. Teen creates app for autistic students. Industry calls it revolutionary. When a public education platform acquired it for $3.2 million, I cried. Not because of the money, but because when they interviewed him and asked who helped him most, he pointed to me and said, "My grandma taught me I wasn't broken." That morning was the happiest of my life. The next morning was the strangest. A silver car pulled into my driveway. The door opened, and out stepped a woman in a tailored suit. Then another woman stepped out behind her, my daughter, Kelsey, wearing sunglasses large enough to hide behind. "Mom," she said, as if she hadn't disappeared for 13 years, "I'm here for my son." My stomach turned cold. The lawyer stepped forward. "Miss Harding, my client is prepared to pursue parental rights, custody, and control over the financial benefits of her minor child's intellectual property." Eli stood behind me, silent and trembling. Kelsey smiled at him with a sweetness she never used when he was small. "Honey, I've missed you so much." I'd like to say I shouted or slammed the door or said something wise and cutting, but I simply stood there, letting the weight of the moment settle. Eli took my hand. Quietly, he said, "Grandma, can we go inside?" And that was all I needed. I looked at the lawyer. "You can file whatever papers you want, but if you think you can show up after 13 years and claim ownership of a young man you never raised, you are in for a very long, very public fight." The lawyer opened her mouth, then closed it. Kelsey didn't speak again. We walked back into the house, our house, and I locked the door behind us. It wasn't over. I knew there would be hearings, evaluations, and documents to sign. But I also knew something stronger. Eli wasn't alone, and no judge in the world could erase the truth of who raised him. Months later, the court granted me full permanent guardianship until Eli turned 18, at which point he would hold full legal control of his app and finances. Kelsey was granted supervised visitation, visits Eli never once chose to attend. When he finally turned 18, he made me tea, sat across the table, and said, "You kept me safe." "No," I told him, "you kept me going." We built a life together, the two of us, and no amount of money, not even $3.2 million, could rewrite the history of who stayed and who walked away. Eli grew up in a small, quiet house at the edge of town where life moved at a gentle pace, and every day followed a rhythm that made sense to him. His grandmother filled the space with soft encouragement and patient guidance because she understood that predictability helped him thrive. Eli rarely spoke during his early years, yet his mind was always active, always observing, always piecing together the world in his own careful way. He found comfort in patterns and shapes, and he could spend hours studying the way light moved across the kitchen floor or the way the wires inside an old radio twisted around each other in perfect order. While other children ran across playgrounds and shouted to their friends, Eli sat in the shade, taking apart small objects and arranging their pieces into new forms that only he understood. His teachers often mistook his quiet nature for disinterest, but his grandmother knew better. She watched him examine the world with an intensity that hinted at hidden genius, and she nurtured that spark with every tool, book, and device she could find for him. As he grew older, he discovered a deep fascination with technology. His grandmother found an old laptop at a yard sale, and even though it barely turned on, Eli approached it like a puzzle waiting to be solved. He studied its components and taught himself how to repair them through trial, intuition, and hours of exploration. When the machine finally whirred back to life, he felt a sense of triumph that lit something new inside him. Technology became his language. Digital spaces felt orderly, predictable, and honest in a way that people often did not. He began teaching himself programming by watching online tutorials, pausing often to take notes in the small notebooks his grandmother bought in stacks because he filled them so quickly. By the time he reached his mid-teens, he had spent thousands of hours experimenting with code. He noticed that many neurodivergent students, including himself, struggled to stay organized in environments built around spoken instructions and long written tasks. Traditional planners overwhelmed him, so he imagined something different, a tool that translated tasks into visual sequences, rhythms, and shapes. A tool that respected the way his mind worked rather than forcing him to fit into a narrow system that caused stress and confusion. He began building the first prototype at the dining table while his grandmother read nearby, offering tea and quiet company. Piece by piece, he shaped the app into something powerful. It allowed users to break tasks into steps represented by color and movement, and it linked routines to visual patterns, instead of long sentences that could be difficult to process. Friends at school tried early versions, and their reactions filled him with quiet pride, because for the first time, he felt not only understood, but useful. What started as a personal tool became a creation that spoke to thousands of people who shared his challenges. His grandmother watched him grow from a quiet child into a young inventor with a vision shaped by empathy, perseverance, and a mind that saw order where others saw chaos. His mother had slipped out of his life so quietly and so early that Eli carried only fragments of memories of her. A voice that rose too quickly, a perfume that lingered in the air long after she stormed out of a room, the sharp rhythm of her footsteps pacing when she felt overwhelmed. He never fully understood why she left, because no one ever sat him down with a simple explanation. His grandmother only said she wasn't ready to be a mother, and that some people broke under the weight of responsibility. As a child, Eli accepted that answer because he had no choice, and because asking questions about her made his grandmother's eyes soften with a sadness he didn't want to deepen. Life settled into a quiet pattern after that absence, becoming a normal shape in the background of his days. Her name wasn't forbidden, but it wasn't spoken either, and he learned to push her image into a corner of his memory where it couldn't sting him anymore. Years passed, and the gap she left behind filled with the presence of his grandmother, who became both anchor and compass for him. He grew within the safety of her routines and her unwavering belief in his potential. When news spread about his app gaining traction, it surprised everyone, except her. She had witnessed every late night spent at the table, every line of code scribbled into his notebooks, and every moment he questioned whether the world would ever understand the way he thought. When the offer for $3.2 million came through, she rushed to his room with trembling hands, as if afraid the number might vanish if she blinked. Eli accepted the news with quiet astonishment, because to him, the work mattered more than the money, but he couldn't deny the sudden shift in the air that followed. Reporters emailed, investors called, teachers congratulated him, and neighbors he barely knew mentioned how proud the community was. The world had stepped closer to him than ever before, and although that attention felt overwhelming, he leaned into it little by little with his grandmother steady beside him. Then came the knock at the door that neither of them expected. A sleek car pulled into the driveway, the kind Eli had only seen in movies, and a woman stepped out wearing a fitted jacket and carrying a thin folder under her arm. Behind her emerged someone else, someone familiar and yet distant and changed. His mother stood there looking polished, fragile, forced into a version of herself that didn't match the memories he kept. She said his name with a brightness that rang false, and something deep inside him curled away. For years, she hadn't sent a letter or a birthday card or a simple message to ask whether he was safe. Now she walked toward him with outstretched arms, as if the past had dissolved, the same way breath fades from a mirror. She spoke about mistakes and longing and how she always meant to return. She spoke about needing another chance, but beneath the words, Eli sensed something heavy, something rehearsed, something sharpened by the presence of the lawyer beside her. The silence that followed felt colder than the winter air drifting through the door. And in that moment, he understood that she hadn't come back because of love or regret, but because his success had created a new value he'd never had in her eyes before. The day his mother returned with a lawyer began like any other quiet morning in their small house. Eli was seated at the dining table working on a new update for his app, while his grandmother brewed tea, humming softly to herself. The world outside felt peaceful, a gentle pause after months of sudden attention and new opportunities. Neither of them imagined that by noon, everything they had rebuilt together would be shaken by the past walking straight up the driveway. When the doorbell rang, his grandmother expected a delivery or maybe a neighbor dropping by to congratulate Eli again. She wiped her hands on a towel and opened the door with her usual warmth, but the expression she wore next was something between shock and guarded strength. Standing on the porch was a sharply dressed woman holding a leather folder, and beside her stood the figure they both recognized, even though time had changed her face. Eli's mother looked nothing like the unsettled, overwhelmed young woman who had disappeared years ago. She looked polished and confident, as though she had spent the morning rehearsing how to stand, how to smile, how to breathe. Her hands trembled only slightly, but her eyes kept darting to the lawyer as if waiting for cues. She greeted her mother with a tone that rose too brightly and spoke Eli's name as though she had earned the right to use it. His grandmother shifted her stance, never rude, but unmistakably protective, blocking the doorway with the quiet strength of someone who had held an entire childhood together with her bare hands. The lawyer stepped forward with practiced authority. She introduced herself and explained that her client wished to pursue her rights as Eli's biological parent. She spoke about legal pathways and paperwork and the need to reassess guardianship now that Eli's work had produced significant financial value. She used words like oversight, financial management, and rightful responsibility. The phrases sounded polished, but behind them lurked a message so clear that even Eli, who often struggled to interpret people, felt its cold shape. They were not there because they cared about him. They were there because they cared about what he had created. His mother nodded along with the lawyer's statements, adding small bursts of emotion about lost years and missed opportunities. She said she wanted to reconnect and guide him. She said she had changed. She said she deserved a second chance. But when Eli looked at her, he sensed something hollow in the spaces between her sentences. She never once asked whether he was happy or safe or frightened by her sudden return. She never asked what he liked now, or whether he still collected notebooks, or whether he still lined up objects when he felt overwhelmed. She spoke only about rights and future plans and responsibility, and each word felt heavier than the last. His grandmother listened without interrupting, but Eli could feel the tension radiating from her. When the lawyer finally finished her well-crafted speech, the entire house seemed to hold its breath. The grandmother answered with steady clarity, reminding them that she had been the one who stayed, the one who nurtured him, the one who understood him. The lawyer tried to interrupt, but she raised a hand with the authority of a woman who had earned it. She said they could file whatever they wished, but she would fight with everything she had to protect the child she had raised into the young man he had become. And in that moment, Eli understood that the lawyer had come for money, his mother had come for opportunity, and his grandmother stood as the only person who had come for him. When the door closed behind his mother and the lawyer, the house felt heavier, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the tension. Eli sat at the dining table, staring at the pattern on the wood, while his grandmother brewed another pot of tea, even though neither of them was thirsty. She moved slowly, trying to steady her breathing, and Eli watched her hands shake for the first time in years. He wanted to ask if he had done something wrong, if his mother returning meant something was about to change, but the words tangled in his chest. His grandmother finally set the kettle down and placed a hand on his shoulder, a gentle anchor in a moment where everything felt uncertain. She told him that nothing would happen without his voice being heard, that she would make sure of it, and that her love for him was stronger than any paper a lawyer could carry. The next few days were filled with phone calls, paperwork, and long conversations at the small kitchen table where they had solved every problem in their lives so far. Eli listened while she spoke to attorneys, community advocates, and school counselors, gathering every bit of information she needed. She took notes in her familiar, neat handwriting, the same steady script she had used when helping him learn to read and organize her thoughts. There was no anger in her voice, only a calm determination that reminded him of the way she held his hand during doctor visits when she was younger, assuring him that nothing frightening would touch him without going through her first. She protected him with the same quiet fierceness now, but this time the stakes were higher, and the threat was not a needle or a loud room, but a woman who had returned only because his success had value. When the legal notice arrived requesting a custody evaluation, she read it carefully, then folded it with a precision that made it look like she was closing a door on the past. She explained everything to Eli in the simplest way she could, telling him what the court would look for and what they needed to prepare. She never spoke poorly about his mother, even though she had every reason to. Instead, she focused on what was true: the years she had spent raising him, the routines they built together, the trust they shared, the progress he made in her care. She gathered school reports, therapist notes, and letters from teachers who had witnessed the bond between them. She knew the silence of his early years, the nights he struggled to sleep, the fear he felt in unfamiliar places. She had seen every breakthrough, every smile, every moment of progress, and she presented each piece of their shared history like a woven tapestry that could not be undone. During the home visits, she stayed close, but not overbearing, allowing Eli to respond in his own way, giving him the space he needed while remaining his steady presence. Whenever he hesitated, her hand would rest lightly on the back of his chair, grounding him, reminding him he was safe. When the evaluator asked what he wanted, he answered softly that he wanted to stay where love had always lived. His grandmother's eyes filled, but she stayed strong, her posture straight, her expression calm. In the courtroom, she spoke with unwavering clarity about the life she and Eli had built. She described how he thought, how he learned, how he flourished under stability. She told the truth plainly, without exaggeration or bitterness. And when she finished, everyone in the room could feel the weight of her devotion. She had not fought out of pride or fear, but because she had made a promise the day his mother left. She vowed to protect him, and she intended to keep that vow, no matter who challenged it. The day of the final court hearing began with a gray sky that seemed to mirror the weight in the air. Eli dressed slowly, his hands trembling slightly as he buttoned his shirt. His grandmother helped him smooth the fabric over his shoulders, whispering that he was safe, that she was right there, and that nothing would happen that he couldn't handle. They drove to the courthouse in quiet, the kind of quiet that felt protective rather than empty. She kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror, offering small, reassuring smiles, while he traced patterns on the window with his fingertip, grounding himself in the familiar rhythm. Inside the courthouse, the halls echoed with footsteps and murmured conversations. His grandmother guided him through the crowd with a gentle hand at his back, and he stayed close to her steady presence. His mother sat with her lawyer across the room, dressed elegantly, her posture stiff, her expression unreadable. She gave them a brief smile as if she wanted to appear warm, but Eli looked away, feeling the old confusion rise like a tide. He focused on the sound of his grandmother's breathing, soft and even, a reminder that he was not alone. When the hearing began, the judge listened carefully as each attorney presented their arguments. His mother's lawyer spoke about biological rights and second chances, and the belief that a parent should be given the opportunity to reconnect with a child. She used polished phrases and rehearsed statements, and she tried to paint a picture of a woman who had simply needed time to grow. His mother nodded through the entire speech, her eyes occasionally flicking toward the folder filled with documents about the value of Eli's work. Then it was his grandmother's turn. She stood slowly, adjusting her glasses before speaking. Her voice was not loud, but it carried a strength that filled the room. She talked about the first night he cried without understanding why, the countless doctor visits, the routines she built to help him feel safe, the quiet triumphs he experienced when he mastered new skills. She explained how she learned to interpret the signals he could not put into words, and how she fought for his education, for his therapy, for his comfort in a world that often overwhelmed him. She did not speak with bitterness, she simply offered truth, softened by love. Eli listened to her describe him not as a burden, but a blessing that had shaped her life in ways she never expected. For the first time, he realized how deeply she understood him, how completely she had embraced every part of who he was. When the judge asked him if he wanted to say anything, he whispered that he wanted to stay with her because she was home in every way that mattered. The courtroom fell silent. The judge looked at him, then at his grandmother, then at the woman who had returned only after his success. In a calm, steady voice, the judge ruled in favor of the grandmother, granting her full legal guardianship until he reached adulthood. The decision felt like a weight lifting from the air. His mother's face tightened, her lawyer quickly gathered papers, but neither tried to argue. The judge's ruling was clear and firm, acknowledging that caregiving was more than biology, that devotion and presence mattered most. As they left the courtroom, his grandmother placed her arm around him, and he leaned into her warmth, relieved, knowing the law had seen what he had always known. She was the one who had stayed. She was the one who loved him. She was the one who would continue to protect him no matter what came next. When Eli turned 18, the morning felt strangely quiet, as if the world understood that something important was shifting in his life. He woke early, before his grandmother, and sat at the edge of his bed, listening to the soft creaks of the old house around him. For the first time, he felt the weight of adulthood pressing gently on his shoulders, not frightening, but undeniably present. His birthday had always been simple: a small cake, a handful of candles, and his grandmother's warm voice singing slightly off-key. But this year came with more than celebration. It came with independence, choices, and responsibilities that only he could make. His grandmother made him breakfast, just like every year, placing the plate in front of him with a smile that reached her eyes. She wished him happy birthday in the soft tone that always eased his nerves. After he finished eating, she handed him a stack of papers bound neatly in a folder. It contained the final documents granting him full legal control of his finances, the app, and every decision tied to his work. The guardianship that had once protected him had officially ended. She told him she was proud of the young man he had become, and that everything now belongs to him, not because of luck, but because of the hours and years he had poured into his creation. They drove together to the office where he signed the final forms. The lawyer who assisted them spoke kindly, explaining each line slowly, giving him time to process every detail. His grandmother sat beside him patiently, allowing him to take as long as he needed. When he pressed the final signature onto the page, he felt something loosen inside him, a sense of control he had never fully experienced before. The app that had once been only an idea in his mind was now entirely his. So was the financial security that came with it. He felt proud, but also grateful that he had not walked this path alone. But the day carried another shadow, someone they both expected might appear. His mother had tried contacting him a few times in the months leading up to her birthday, short messages asking if he would talk, if she wanted to see her, if she would consider letting her explain everything. Eli read each message quietly, then placed his phone face down. He felt no anger, only an understanding that some connections break in ways that cannot be repaired. He remembered the silence she had left behind, the empty years, the sudden return that had nothing to do with love. The attempts she made now felt like echoes, arriving too late. That afternoon, she sent one final message, saying she hoped she would let her be part of his life again, now that he was grown. Eli stared at the screen for a long time, trying to decide if he should respond. His grandmother waited nearby, not pressuring him, not offering an opinion, simply giving him space to choose his own path. After a quiet moment, he turned off the phone without replying. The past had shaped him, but it no longer held him. He chose the family that had chosen him every single day. When evening came, he and his grandmother shared a small cake like always. She lit the candles, and he made a wish before blowing them out. He did not wish for forgiveness or reunion. He wished for peace, for clarity, and for the strength to continue building the life they had created together. And as the flame smoke curled into the air, he felt certain he had made the right choice. As the years settled into place and the storms that once threatened Eli's life slowly quieted, a clearer truth began to emerge, one that shaped every corner of the story he lived. It became visible in the quiet mornings spent at the kitchen table, in the shared routines that stitched each day together, in the gentle way his grandmother reached for his hand when he struggled with crowds or noise or too much change at once. Their bond was not something that had been inherited through blood, but something built intentionally through countless small choices. Every moment of patience, every late night of comfort, every encouraging word when he doubted himself grew into a foundation stronger than anything formed by simple biology. Eli often thought about the idea of family in his own way, turning it around in his mind like a pattern he was trying to understand. He knew that some people believed family was determined the moment a child was born, but his life had shown him something different. He had seen what happened when someone who shared his blood chose distance over presence and convenience over commitment. He had also seen how his grandmother stepped forward without hesitation, carrying responsibilities she had never asked for and never once complained about. She had chosen him every day for years, and that choice created a type of love he trusted completely. He learned that loyalty was not loud. It lived in the quiet consistency of someone showing up again and again, even when life was heavy, even when the world expected them to give up. His grandmother displayed that loyalty in everything she did, whether she was sitting beside him at doctor appointments, or helping him navigate unfamiliar conversations, or simply leaving a lamp on in the hallway so he would not feel lost in the dark. She never asked for recognition. Her reward was seeing him grow stronger, more confident, more himself with each passing year. Parental responsibility had taken on a deeper meaning for him too. It was not about who held a title or who claimed a right by law. It was about who stood beside him during the moments that shaped him. His mother's absence had once been a wound he did not know how to name, but over time, he realized that the absence told him more about responsibility than her presence ever had. Responsibility was not something spoken, it was something proven through action, through sacrifice, through staying when leaving was easier. Unconditional love became the final piece of the truth he carried. It was the kind of love that did not depend on success or money or convenience. His grandmother loved him when he was quiet, when he struggled to communicate, when the world did not understand him. Her love wrapped around him so fully that he never had to question if he mattered. And when he succeeded, when his work changed lives, she celebrated him, not for the wealth it brought, but for the courage it took to create something meaningful. Their story was never about the person who shared his DNA. It was about the person who shared his burdens, his joys, his fears, and his dreams. It proved that family could be chosen, that love could be deliberate, and that the strongest bonds were formed not through birth, but through devotion that asked for nothing in return. In the end, the story of Eli and his grandmother became something far greater than the sum of its difficult beginnings and unexpected turns. It unfolded slowly, like a long, quiet lesson on what truly defines a family and what love is supposed to look like when life tests its strength. Their journey proved that the bonds that matter most are never guaranteed by birth or promised by shared blood. They are earned day by day through presence, patience, and the kind of steady loyalty that does not waver when circumstances shift or when challenges rise like waves. Eli's life did not follow the path his mother once imagined for herself, nor did it follow the one his grandmother ever expected to walk at her age. Yet together, they built something stronger than any traditional idea of family because every step forward was shaped by choice. When his mother left, he experienced a silence that could have hardened him or made him fearful of connection. Instead, the space she abandoned was filled by someone who understood that responsibility is not a word spoken, but a promise lived. His grandmother never tried to replace his mother or rewrite the story of how he came to depend on her. She simply showed up every day with the kind of soft determination that wrapped itself around his anxieties and allowed him to grow at his own pace. She taught him that setbacks were not failures and that his way of thinking was not wrong, but simply different. She guided him with a tenderness that was steady and unshakable, helping him discover his strengths and navigate the world in ways that honored who he was. When the world eventually recognized his brilliance and his work brought unexpected wealth, he faced a truth that many people rarely confront. Some hands reach out only when there is something valuable to grasp. His mother's return carried the shape of regret, but not the depth of genuine responsibility. And though he did not hate her, he could not bind his future to someone whose presence depended on opportunity. In contrast, the grandmother who had stayed through every challenge asked for nothing in return, not even gratitude, because her love had never been a transaction. It was a promise she made silently the day he was left in her care. As he reached adulthood and took control of his life and his future, he did so with a quiet strength he had learned from her. He understood that forgiveness is not the same as reconciliation, and that closing a door does not mean closing his heart. It simply meant choosing peace over uncertainty and choosing the family that had chosen him first. The conclusion of their story was not marked by victory or defeat, but by clarity. It showed that love offered freely and consistently creates a foundation no courtroom decision, no amount of money, and no biological connection can rewrite. And in that understanding, Eli stepped into the next chapter of his life, not defined by abandonment, but shaped by the unwavering devotion that raised him and showed him what real family truly means.